Hi, my name is Tracy Kijewski-Correa, and I'm a professor in civil and environmental engineering and earth sciences, as well as the Keough School of Global Affairs at the University of Notre Dame. Here, I also serve as the William J. Pulte Director for the Pulte Institute for Global Development. My dissertation research focused on novel techniques to monitor and assess the condition of civil infrastructure subjected to natural hazards. But my work now focuses on how to more holistically build the resilience of communities in the face of those hazards. I'm a first generation college student, so achieving a PhD is a pretty big accomplishment in that regard. I also set the precedent to join the faculty at my PhD granting university, which is usually not allowed unless you're an exceptional candidate. So those for me were two of my early career successes, and they were quite significant. I would say the third is in the area of things that are quite successful or unique about me. I'm trained as a structural engineer, but I'm actually running an institute, the Pulte Institute, in a school of global affairs and public policy. And so the ability for me to actually pivot and excel in multiple fields was probably the third thing that I'm most proud of. For me, the more challenging part of my graduate experience was that I was providing skilled nursing care in parallel with getting my PhD. And so I was doing nursing care and eventually end of life care for my two grandparents through the first half of my graduate studies at Notre Dame. That created a lot of unique challenges, balancing my personal and professional life. And really, as you might expect, reduced my productivity as a graduate student. It created just tons of tension for me and struggle. So I would say that the duality of those two lives during that first part of my PhD was exceptionally challenging. And I think it was hard because it was one of the most, emotional parts of my experience, the fact that these two worlds, they bifurcated, my personal and professional. In the one world, I was this lead caregiver for my family. I was the lead of this like makeshift home care unit that included all my aunts and uncles and my mother. We're like taking shifts for both my grandmother and my grandfather. They're both bedridden, like two different bedrooms in the same house. And then there's the academic half of my life. So my advisor was a National Academy member. We're talking about somebody who has like a really high bar in terms of expectation, only handpicks and works with the best students that he believes are worthy of working with someone like him. And so I felt, that I had to always be continuously like proving my worthiness to be, accepted to that level of invitation. And he selected me as an undergrad. So I felt this huge responsibility to deliver on that early promise, if you will, and this huge fear of that I would just disappoint him, that I would, fail at this huge invitation that he had given me because of these other factors in my life that honestly I couldn't control and I couldn't walk away from those. It made me feel like I wasn't winning on either side of my life. So both my grandparents were slowly dying. No matter what I did, I couldn't fix that. My family was crumbling under the weight of all of that burden. And then I would go to campus and be faced with all the ways that I wasn't meeting the bar to this amazing advisor. Life in that period was, split between those two worlds, literally physically. And it was really just a heavy period of my life where I felt like I wasn't winning on either side. Mentally, I was feeling split, I was failing, and just absolutely exhausted. I actually didn't sleep much the entire time that I was back home caregiving for my grandparents. And I think and I feel guilty saying it out loud, but there was also this like real fear of missing out because I never had a weekend in those 3 years where I could say I honestly had a social life. And then I think there was also this really heavy guilt. When I was at the university, I was always worried about what's going on at home. And then when I was at home, I was worried because I was either missing social life or I wasn't going to be like on my A game when I came back on Monday as a student. So there was guilt no matter where I was, what I was doing. There was a part of me that just wasn't being tended to. And I think, for me, that was the first time in my life I felt so split. So then I think, about what that meant for me, this constant feeling of being pulled in two dimensions, feeling, guilt and resentment on all that I was missing, it really then accumulated to mental and eventually physical exhaustion. It was really hard coming back on Mondays and trying to do research. And I think that started to create a real tension with my advisor and I. When I would be back at college doing my research, it would almost be guaranteed that a phone call would come from home that something happened. Somebody would say, "Hey, grandma just got taken to the hospital. How fast can you get here?" And I'm running out of our research building, out to the car, and driving back to trying to triage what's going on, taking my laptop, trying to keep working. But, you're sitting in the hospital. You can't really be productive. And I remember that, especially as they started more rapidly deteriorating, especially my grandma when she hit the stage of being in hospice, that was very difficult at the end because now it was the end of like 3 years of me being in and out with my advisor. And the day that they called and said, it's time to come home, almost signaling that she was going to be leaving soon, I remember my advisor telling me that I couldn't, that I had obligations, that I had to stay here and finish some work that had a critical deadline. And I just remember looking at him and saying, I can't. Like, I've got to be home. And so I just ran to the car and left. And I didn't know, honestly, what would become of our relationship when I returned. I knew that my productivity was going down, and I didn't blame him for being frustrated because it had real cost to him. And the end result is that I started to see my mental and physical health start to deteriorate. I was not achieving in the ways I had been used to on either side of the equation. And I couldn't beat death on one side. I couldn't hit his bar on the other. And it was a no-win. So, I mean, I'm sitting here right now. I'm about 50 years old. I am about 30 years removed from that experience. So I can look back and recognize with sincere honesty that I was really maladaptively coping in that period. Most of what I was doing was like stress eating. I was ignoring all the warning signs that my body was giving me and my mind. And I was just pouring myself 1,000% into trying to control really what was uncontrollable, right? Save my grandparents from two terminal illnesses is just a ridiculous expectation. I think for me to expect that I could honor my family and still achieve my PhD at the same bar that I had for myself and my advisor had, I think that that was almost a ridiculous set of expectations I was putting on myself, especially me as a girl who's a first gen college student and probably even, doesn't even realize like, how did I even get into undergrad, never less a PhD, right? So the expectation bar was just crushing. And so not wanting to admit defeat, if you will, I overworked myself. I overfunctioned. I tried everything I could just to power through that period. And, as things were falling apart around me, self-care was just an afterthought. There was none of it during that time. Looking back, if I were to have grabbed that girl in her 20s and looked at her, I would have said that self-care was actually the most important thing I could have done. I could have been better for my family, my grandparents, and my research if I had actually taken care of myself. But I think the problem was, as a young graduate student out on her own, I did not have the financial capacity to forego my stipend. And I just didn't know how I could do it, even if I could do it without that money. So without an alternative, I just said, look, I'm going to power through this. I'm going to white knuckle all the way through this whole thing. And probably that's not the best, but it was the only survival mode I knew to go into. But again, looking back, if I had taken a leave or at minimum even taken better care of myself, I could have been more present for my grandparents. And I think in the end, I would have come out of it a more whole woman than the fractured person that, emerged after my grandparents passed away. It's just sadly our financial situation really prohibited that. Overall, I would say that learning from failure, especially the series of like I would call failures that happened during this period, that learning didn't come right away. Honestly, it came much later down the line. When I came out of this like period of caregiving, the immediate after effects of it, I hadn't learned, to be honest, hardly any lessons from that period. I didn't develop or cultivate any coping, or healthy coping strategies in the thick of it. When I got out, instead of working on developing those, I instead poured myself like turbo speed into the professional side of my life, right? And then eventually into a faculty position. I was just making up for lost time. So that meant that all the very negative things that I was doing during the caregiving stage of my life, they stayed, with me, and they even amplified because of how much I was now pouring myself into my work in this unsustainable way to kind of make up for lost time. So I don't know that I moved forward in a positive way. I just moved forward. And so I really didn't learn, honestly, until I crashed multiple times. So it was definitely like delayed learning. And looking back after coming through multiple, I would call them failures and burnouts, I realized the importance of my mental health. And I actually started to understand what self-care meant. I started to understand like, oh, you can set boundaries and you don't have to feel guilty about it. You can learn and be comfortable with giving yourself grace and telling the whole world that you're doing so. And it's okay. It's okay to say, hey, I'm going to prioritize my life and this part of my life right now. And life is really, like I tell people, it's full of seasons. You're not going to have all the parts of your life working perfectly, like on their A game in every season. There's a season when you're going to shine as a mother, or at least have to pour more into that. There's going to be a season when you're going to shine as a student and maybe later as a professional. And that season that I was in, when I was taking care of my grandparents, that was a season to shine as a granddaughter who just wanted to give back to her grandparents who raised her. And when that season ends, I'm going to be everything for a different part of my life. But that's just not the season we're in today. And I don't think I knew how to articulate that to others and give myself the grace to accept that inside and then communicate that through healthy boundaries outside. I just never did that. Now I do that all the time, but back then I did not. I eventually learned the right way to adapt and the right way to cope. And I use those now as my mainstay tools. So if you talk to like the 40s Tracy, and even Tracy now at 50, I use meditation practice very regularly. And I really know how to amp it up when I see warning signs that some of my thought patterns are starting to go toward those dark places that I know they can go. And when I see those behaviors showing, that's when I really get serious about my practices. I'm very good at real-time reframing of my thoughts, which I couldn't do before. I'm real good at like using gratitude practice to shift the perspective on things that happen throughout the day. And for me, because I inherently very negatively bias and overanalyze things like always, I can see how when I'm stressed, that really amplifies. So I'm real conscious about my thoughts and how much I listen to them and how I reframe them when they're starting to get into a dark place that I don't like to see. And I know that I'm always going to go into this fight or flight kind of or freeze mechanism because I am a highly intense and anxious person. And I see many things as threats. But I've learned how to, again, reframe them so I can understand that they're not the big catastrophic thing my mind might jump to. And I can use my thought labeling to correct when those thoughts are starting to spiral and get, again, into a very unhealthy place. And because I have a really strong and pretty aggressive mind, I have to be really vigilant in monitoring that self-talk up there. And now I know that when my mind is looking like it's going to get stuck, and when it gets stuck, it's really bad, I learned how to stop it from getting stuck, or when it is, get it out of that loop pretty quickly. And I'm proud of myself for being able to do that. So now I know how to manage all those pieces of my physical, emotional, and mental well-being. And my toolbox is really big at 50, but it was not very big at 21, not at all. Well, obviously we're going to have challenges throughout our whole life. So I think the importance of having your toolbox and knowing that you have it to go to and you can rely on in a time of crisis is critical. But the key is you can't be learning them in the time of crisis. You need to have your toolbox built and know how to use all of your tools and practice your tools well before the moment of shock. That would be my first piece of advice. Like, students should actually develop the toolbox and practice them in what I call peacetime, when nothing's wrong. Because then when you go into wartime, that's when they're second nature and you have the muscle memory to pull them up and use them. So advice number one, develop the toolbox, and also recognize your toolbox will be different. Everybody's is. I would also say that, beyond the tool work, which is hard work, you got to go and experiment, explore, and then build your tools. My second is just a general piece of advice. I teach a freshman seminar course here at Notre Dame called Moreau, which teaches students about what it means to live a life well lived. And when we say life well lived, it's not just like how to be a successful college student, but how to be a good person in the world. The fact that, I have a chance in that class to remind my students with this general phrase I say to them, remember, you are a human being, not a human doing. And you have inherent value and dignity and worthiness. And love, right? You're loved not for what you do or don't do, what you achieve or don't achieve today or tomorrow, but just for who you are, just for being, just for arriving on this planet. And I think it's critical for our students to actually be reminded of that. We are not defined by what we achieve or don't achieve. And it's really important that we start sending that message. So I think when I went through that period in grad school where I felt that bifurcation, that feeling of opposition between my two worlds, hitting so hard, it's because we've built a kind of academia that doesn't understand or value that side of us. And I can say confidently now, I actually don't care if my university counts those things. I know they don't keep score on it. I certainly don't. But these are the non-negotiables in my life. And I like being confident enough to say that these are non-negotiables and to be at peace with saying that and not feel any more regret or guilt, not be split in half like I was in my 20s. And I just feel bad that we all don't get this wisdom younger in life. I can honestly say, like, I didn't learn this stuff till probably my 40s, right? By my 40s, I came into my own. And now I understand how I am as a woman in the world, how I can balance my hats in different seasons unapologetically. And my number one job is to actually now teach students exactly how to do this in their 20s so they don't have to wait till like their 40s and 50s to learn everything I did. Thanks for watching Failsafe Science. My name is Tracy, and I hope that my story helps you remember that you are a human being, not a human doing. And taking care of that human, it should always come first.